Hi, review time today, and here we've got the new Flir, or Flir, I don't know how you're supposed to say that, E4 thermal imaging camera. This is a fairly new device. It's a new range of devices they brought out, aiming really at the low cost end of the market. This is the lowest end. It's just under $1,000, about £800 plus VAT. 80 by 60 thermal resolution. As you go up the range, the thermal resolution increases up to 320 by 240 for the top end. The higher end ones have got a few extra measurement facilities, picture-in-picture and so on. The basic model is sort of basic thermal imaging camera, but the unusual thing is this has actually got a visible camera built in as well, and it actually has quite a clever overlaying system that Flir call MSX, where it actually overlays edges from the visible image, basically make it easier to see what's going on in the thermal image. One of the problems with low resolution thermal imaging cameras, particularly at a distance, is that it can be quite hard to see actually what you're looking at. You know, you may see this like hot spot somewhere, but because the resolution's fairly low and because the image looks a bit alien because it's in the thermal spectrum, it can actually be quite hard to figure out what it actually is that's glowing. So what they've done is they've added a high resolution visible image as a sort of a weak overlay. I'll show you in detail in a minute, which is really useful in actually identifying, okay, there's some hot over there, but you can actually figure out what it is that's hot quite easily. You can sort of get the context, which can be very hard without that on a purely thermal image. The range goes up. There's the E4, 5, 6 and 8, don't quite know what happened to the 7. And so the resolution goes up through the range, a few extra features, and the price also increases quite substantially, so from just under $1,000 to £800 for the E4. The E8 is about over £4,000, so there's a big price jump for the extra resolution. And as I found just playing around with this for about a day, I've only had it for about a day, having that extra overlay actually I think really negates a lot of the need for having high resolution in the thermal images. So for general purpose use, I think actually the base level E4 will be more than enough for a lot of applications, and I think it's questionable whether it's worth paying probably nearly 5 times as much for the high resolution version. But obviously everyone's application is different and different people have different requirements. But the fairly sort of new thing about this, it's a fairly low cost device as thermal imagers go, with some quite interesting facilities, particularly this overlaying of the video imaging. Right, just quickly run over all the hardware details. This is the case it comes in. This is a really sort of solid, rugged case. It's like a Peli case. I don't know if it's actually made by Peli or if it's just a clone, but it's very similar. You've got sort of locking facilities and some nice chunky latches, sort of compartment for putting nameplates and so on. Actually, I think this is probably not a very good idea. If you've got some really expensive fragile piece of kit that comes with lots of accessories and lenses and so on, then yes, you probably do want a case like this to keep it all together. But yeah, this is basically just a standalone tool. Chances are this isn't the only thing you're going to be taking with you, so I think it would actually make a lot more sense to give it a much more compact, maybe just a nice padded soft case, because this is just a lot of bulk and it's nearly all polystyrene. It's okay, it protects it, but it's it's a lot of weight and space that just isn't really necessary for a product like this. Obviously they're higher end kit. You can expect to get something like this, but for a low-end device, I think they would have done better to spend the money on a really nice sort of soft padded case, or maybe even a much smaller hard case, so that you can stick it in your tool bag with your other stuff, have it protected, but without having to sort of lug all this bulk around with you. And apart from the camera, there's this box of accessories. There's nothing particularly exciting in here. We've got this hello, welcome, thank you from Andrew C. Teach, President, Flir Commercial Systems Inc. Thank you for buying your thermal camera. Yeah, whatever. Calibration certificate, which is basically a piece of paper with a serial number. All it says is it's calibrated to traceable sources, no actual calibration results, but for something like this you probably wouldn't really expect that. List of contents, yeah, well, fine. Warranty extension. Now this, if you register it, you get 2 years warranty on the camera and 10 years on the detector. The other thing which isn't mentioned on here, which is on the website, I'm assuming the website's more up to date, is there's also a 5-year warranty on the battery, which is really good. Sort of pretty unusual. Okay, something like this doesn't really hammer the battery like something like a power tool, but on a 5-year warranty on a battery is pretty good value. Thing about the software, for some reason they've actually got a picture of a CD case, but you can only get the software by downloading it from the website. I'll look into that a bit later. Book of important information. This is all the usual sort of warning, caution nonsense about, sort of don't throw it at people, don't eat it, all that sort of nonsense in 20 odd languages. There's only about sort of 5 pages for each language, so that's not very useful. Getting started guide, again, this is actually in 21 languages, and it's just the basic sort of idiot's guide, sort of 3 or 4 pages, most of which would be sort of pretty obvious, so not particularly useful. This doesn't actually have the software on it, but it's got user manuals. It's got tons and tons of application notes, pictures from the company archives, company history, lots of applications and all sorts of stuff. Vaguely useful, but I mean, I don't see why they can just stick this on the website. I don't think it's particularly useful to have it as a CD. A warranty sticker, I'm not quite sure what you're supposed to do with that. Maybe the idea is the dealer sticks that on it to register the warranty. And there's a standard USB micro cable there, and a mains adapter, which is the usual sort of thing that comes with all the sort of proper mains plugs and all these weird sort of foreign nonsense, horrible mains plugs, and with a flip out thing for sort of US style things. This is 5 volts at 2 amps, 2.1 amps, made in China obviously. Feels sort of reasonably chunky. As with any Chinese power supply, I think we're going to need to take a look inside that just to be sure, because you really can't be too sure. It's got a nice blue LED on it. I always like it when they put LEDs on mains adapters, because if you're in a situation where you plug the whole thing in and nothing's happening, it's very nice just to get a quick confirmation that it's you've got power here and it's not your dodgy main supply. So that's something I do quite like to see on a mains adapter. And that's really it. That's no other accessories. There's a sort of compartment here. Obviously this is a generic case for different models. There's a section here that takes a battery. I assume that's for a lens, but this doesn't have interchangeable lenses, so I think that's just generic sort of hole in there. I'm just going to take a quick look inside this power supply. Can't remember if I've shown you on this on the video before, but these things tend to be ultrasonic welded, which on the face it makes it look like quite hard to get apart, but I found a very effective technique is you just hold them fairly loosely in your hand and take a screwdriver, that's sort of plastic handle screwdriver with a lumpy bit. You hold it loosely so you sort of give it a sort of fairly sharp whack, and as you run along the seams, it's quite effective at actually cracking the weld. And you can usually hear when it goes, because the note changes as it starts cracking. You get a slightly more sort of duller sound from it. And most things like batteries and mains adapters, I found this method to actually work really well, and it will generally crack it out of the weld so you can actually glue it back together again afterwards. There you go, it's starting to come apart now. Right, and this looks pretty reasonable. There's quite a lot of sort of gunk holding it all together, but it's got all the things we'd like to see. It's got a sort of fiberglass PCB, it's got a proper enclosed fuse, little sort of heatsink there. Yeah, sort of perfectly good build quality. I'm totally happy with that. I would absolutely expect a company like Flir to put a decent quality power supply in, but say with the Chinese stuff, you really there's no substitute for pulling it apart to see to check that it is actually built properly. Is a filter there. It doesn't actually seem to have a common mode filter in there, as far as I can see, but there is some mains filtering on there. But that looks pretty good as Chinese power supplies go. I wouldn't be at all concerned about that. So it's a nice good quality PCB, fiberglass, through plated board, so yeah, totally happy with that. Right, and the first thing you notice when you pick this thing up is it does actually feel really solid. It feels, chunky. It's not ridiculously heavy, but it's not, it doesn't feel overly light. There's rubber grips pretty much everywhere. You've got a rubber grip here. This has all got a rubber cover on it. There's a sort of grip all the way around the display to protect it. The spec says that it's designed to withstand a drop from 2 meters, which I can sort of quite believe. There's sort of rubberized around here. You squeeze it, there's no give at all when you squeeze it. There's none of the sort of horrible creaky twisty stuff you get on cheap equipment. This really has got a feel of quality about it. And yeah, for something which is okay, it's 800 quid, but it's that's very cheap as thermal imaging. It's basically bottom of the range in terms of thermal imaging cameras, which you can easily pay like 20k for. So the overall build just feels really nice. It feels very comfortable, nice to hold. Very impressed with that. At the top we've got a rubber cover, and there's a micro USB socket for data transfer and charging. I'm not actually sure that micro USB is necessarily a good choice, because it's obviously a fairly big thing and they're not too pushed for space, and I'm just concerned that might be a little bit fragile long term, especially sort of in the top. If you've got the connector plugged into the top, it's possibly a little bit prone to damage. It does look like the edge of the connector is supported by the case to some extent, but I suspect that they may see a few of these back with these connectors broken. There's no SD card slot in here. The only way of getting data out of it is through the micro USB. And around the front we've got the lens. There's a lens cover there, just sort of plastic lens cover. So we've got the main thermal imaging lens here, and there's the visual camera lens, which obviously they've put as close as possible to minimise angle and distance errors. So it looks like they've really tried to get these two as close as possible. Now obviously you could do sort of superimposing images using some sort of clever optical system to actually split it, but that would actually be quite expensive. You need like a beam splitter, which would have to deal with the infrared wavelength. So although it's possible, and it wouldn't surprise me if the really high-end cameras do that, but for a low-end thing, I mean, having a separate camera is orders of magnitude simpler, cheaper and lighter. So that's the way to do it. So the only thing that it can't do is give you accurate registration close up. This is spec'd to, I think, 0.5 meters. It does actually work quite well even closer than that though. You can actually tell it in the menu your approximate distance, so it can actually apply correction to get the best registration, and that you can set down to 300mm or about a foot. One minor complaint about this lens thing, obviously on a low end thing I wouldn't expect it to, for example, have a motorised thing, but what I would have liked is a sensor on there so that when you switch it off it bleeps you a reminder saying, you know, hey dude, just put the lens cover on, because it's quite easy to forget. Actually, you know, to add just like a sensor to detect the position, that wouldn't have really cost much, and I think it would have been a nice little touch just to help to protect the lens. And you know, when you turn it off, it just says, you know, just gives you some indication to remind you to shut the lens cover. But and other than that, I mean, obviously this lens cover is just a sort of like a plastic vein, but it does the job, I think, quite well. This isn't designed to be like super waterproof. I think the IP rating is something like 53 or 54 or something. So this is probably, you know, reasonably okay with the odd little sort of drip here and there, but obviously if you get water straight in there, that's going to be bad news. It says IR lens f equals 6.5mm. You've got this front trigger. This is for taking photos, you get saving images. On the bottom you've got the battery. This is very sort of much like a power tool type battery arrangement. It just sort of snaps in there and clips on. Obviously it's a lithium ion, 2.6 amp hours. They claim a battery life of about 4 hours from this, which is a fairly reasonable sort of battery life. Obviously it charges through USB. It will charge off a PC USB more slowly, but it will charge at full speed through their mains adapter. So the nice thing is, you know, if you take it out and forget the charger, you can charge it from a standard PC. I think some digital camera manufacturers should take note about that, because it's a bit silly that quite often you find a digital camera, you can plug the USB for downloading, it won't actually charge the battery, which is pretty stupid. And the manual does say it will take considerably longer charging it that way, which is fair enough, but at least you can charge it. So if you get stuck, you know you're not going to be stuck with a flat battery. I assume you can probably buy spare batteries as well if you really want to carry a spare. On the back you've got these are sort of, it feels like a sort of slightly rubbery, I'm guessing there's probably a single rubber membrane, but it's actually got clicky switches underneath it. It's not like a standard membrane switch, it's actually a rubber membrane protecting clicky switches, and you can sort of hear and both feel them and hear them. So in a noisy environment you can actually feel the clicky going on there. Right, let's power it on. When you power it on after taking the battery out, it does take longer to start up. So I think it's using a standby mode when it's just been turned on and off. It tells you that this project is subject to US export regulations. One thing I do quite like, you see there's a little progress bar, so the thing is still booting up, but we've got thermal images straight away, so obviously there's some hardware pathway from the sensor to the display, so you don't have to wait for the thing to start up to actually start using. Now I really like that someone's obviously given that a real thought. They've said, okay, this thing's going to take some time to boot up, so let's at least make it fairly usable. And now it's actually fully booted up. We've got the temperature scale here, we've got spot temperature measurement, all that sort of stuff. If I just turn that off again, if you start it up, having turned it off from here rather than the battery coming out, it does actually start up pretty quickly. So if you start it up now, brief menu, and we're off, it's all fully running, so, and that's a fairly reasonable startup time. This is showing approximate. I think the reason it's showing approximate is it hasn't done its calibration yet. Like most thermal cameras, periodically you just freeze the display. What they normally do is they put a mechanical shutter in front of the sensor to get a reference temperature. This does that periodically. There we go, calibrating. I think it does that a few times before it's totally convinced that it's an accurate reading. So it's saying, look, you know, I've not fully calibrated, you know, you can use it but don't rely too much on the readings, and that changes to a sort of solid reading. I haven't actually checked how long it takes, but it's not that long. And interestingly, unlike some other cams, I can't actually hear anything when it's doing that calibration, so I don't know if maybe they've got a really super lightweight vane in there, or they may be using some other method to do it. Does it, I think, maybe once every 30 seconds or a minute or so. It's not particularly intrusive, but that's pretty much standard practice for thermal imaging cameras. One thing they've really got right on this is how the USB interface works. When you plug it in, it enumerates as two devices. One is a file system, so you can just go straight in, download the images directly, so you don't need to use their software to load the images. But it also enumerates as a video and camera device. So you can actually use it. This is just a live view. This is literally exactly what's on the screen, including all the menus and everything. But that also means that although this thing will only record snapshots, you can in principle record video sequences and time lapses when you've got it tethered to a PC, which is quite a nice feature, because you might, for example, want to show a time lapse of how something heats up and cools down over time. So just by using just standard video software, you can do that quite happily. Right, I've just got this fixed at the moment to just run through the menus. You can actually do all the menu stuff while it's connected through the PC, but I found it looks a little bit more jittery than it does on the real screen, so I thought I'd do this on the screen just to get a more accurate feel for its sort of general responsiveness. This is 9 frames a second. Now you'll see a lot of low-end thermal imaging cameras are rated at 9 frames per second. Now this is actually not a technical restriction, it's because cameras that are faster than that come under more severe export restrictions. They're classed as potential weapons, so that's the reason for it. But it does actually seem to be pretty good. I mean, I've not really found this sort of overly sluggish, even at its 9 frames a second. So the basic controls are, you've got the this button which is playback, which just pulls up all your stored images. So you can flip between the normal image and the thermal image. One thing that's a little bit odd is when you change it, you get this sort of weird, sort of slightly garbled image first. I assume that's like a low high-res sort of JPEG decode thing, so it gives you a low-res image first and then gives you the resolution later, which suggests maybe the processor on this isn't really up to decompressing quickly, but it's not a big deal, it just looks a little bit funny. And in playback mode you've got what you'd expect, you've got full screen, doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. Information. Now the weird thing is, what this doesn't give you is the time and date, which is really bizarre. It does have a real-time clock in there, and the images on the PC I believe are actually timed and date stamped properly, but why is there no time and date on this information screen? It's crazy. And obviously you can just delete that image. There's a facility for deleting. You can't mark and delete multiple images, but there is a facility just to delete everything, to empty it out. According to the manual, there's enough memory for approximately 500 images in there. That depends on the exact JPEG compression, but I mean 500 is easily enough to not have to worry about too much. In normal mode, you've got this button pulls up a menu. I'll just quickly run through all the various settings. One thing I did notice is that some of these menu options are a little bit sluggish. So you click it, it can take about a second, sort of there, click, tumpty tom, then it goes in. So it's just about acceptable, but not too nice. So your basic settings, measurement parameters. This is the emissivity. Now this basically determines the relationship between temperature and the amount of infrared that something gives out, which is a function of things like its colour and surface texture. This is one thing that once you start playing with a thermal imaging camera, you can't totally believe the temperature figures you get on there, because you need to take into account what sort of material you're pointing it at. So if it's like a fairly glossy shiny thing compared to like a matte black thing, that will have some effect. So if you actually want to get the most accurate temperature readings, you do need to set this up, and there's actually some quite detailed application notes and so on that come on the CD about all that. I mean, you can read that online. I haven't quite figured out what this reflected temperature thing is all about. Must get around to reading information. I'm assuming that's to do with temperature on sort of shiny surfaces and so on. Alignment distance, this lets you give it an approximate distance to get the most accurate registration between the thermal and the visible image, and so this goes down to 0.3 meters. Save options, this just gives you the option as to whether you want to save the composite image or you actually want to save the photo as a separate image as well. Device settings, region and time, so languages, it supports quite a lot of languages. I think it's 20 languages in the manual, so I'm guessing. So again, this is really sluggish. I don't like this at all. It's a little bit nasty, but fortunately you're not going to need to do this very often, but it's just on the edge of annoying. Temperature units, obviously degrees C or Fahrenheit. Distances, meters or feet, again that's just for setting that other setting. date and time formats. It's got all the usual, you set date or time, you've got all the usual different formats, the sort of normal sensible ones and the sort of stupid, you know, month, day, year, which just doesn't make sense to anybody. I don't know why you'd want to use that. This gives you various options. You can reset the thing to factory settings, delete all the images, auto power off, either nothing, 5 or 20 minutes, which seems reasonably sensible. I assume that takes into account, you know, that you've pressed buttons to reset that. Display brightness. What's a bit stupid here is, you know, you actually have to press the button and go back after setting. It doesn't let you change it in real time. I think this just sets the backlight brightness. So obviously if you're using it in a dark environment you might want to turn it down, but also I would expect it maybe makes a difference in battery life. The other thing here is demonstration mode. Now I'm not actually quite sure what this is. I couldn't find any information about the manual. Even there it's not. I really don't know what that does. I thought it was actually locking the display temperature range, but it didn't. I was playing around with it earlier, but it doesn't seem to be doing that now, so I don't know what that does. Maybe someone can enlighten me. So the ones you're going to use most of the time, image mode, this is really the main sort of mode selection. Now this is the combined thermal imaging, so you've got the thermal image, but also you've got these sort of lines, detail lines that are coming from the visible image. This isn't a very good scene. I'll do some more demos later, and that's pure thermal image, and then that's just the visible image. Measurements, basically that's it, gives you a centre spot measurement, so it's giving you the temperature it's seeing at the centre, or you can just turn it off, which just unclutters the screen a little bit. That's the only difference that really makes. Some of the higher end models have got some more options here. They've got things like min-max within areas and various other features in the measurement, but the base level has just got that spot measurement option, which most of the time I think is probably all you need. There's 3 colour palettes. There's iron. I don't quite know why they call that iron, unless it's just maybe, yeah, hot metal, I suppose. Yeah, hot metal perhaps. Rainbow, this just gives you a wider colour range, so you actually get more of a range of colour throughout, and then simple monochrome. Temperature scale, there's 2 options here. One is auto. What this does, this scales the colour range to all the temperatures that are within the scene. So if I take out those hot lights out of the scene, it's sort of compressing it so you get a better resolution. So that's really optimising the visible resolution. But you can also just lock it, which locks it at the current range. So obviously anything that's really hot is just overloaded and stays overloaded. But if you want to look at temperatures within a certain range without auto ranging, that's sort of what you'd use. Which that's pretty much it for the user interface. Now, although that's sort of nice and simple, I think they've really missed a trick here. I think they've the scope for improvement. The reason for that is here. When you're in normal mode, you've got 5 buttons, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buttons that do absolutely nothing. They're a complete waste of space unless you're in a menu. Now, there aren't that many things that you want to change on the fly, but one of them, for example, is the display mode. It's, you know, you may well quite often want to display this image, change this image mode while you're running. So for example, you see something in the thermal image, you want to clarify it in the digital camera. Now it's stupid to have to go into a menu. You know, this thing's got not that many functions, so you know, why not have, you know, this button cycle through the display modes? Why not maybe have this button perhaps cycle through maybe emissivity or one of the other settings? You know, it's underused. It's really annoying. And okay, there's an argument, well, let's keep it simple, but you know, this isn't going to be used by, you know, untrained monkeys all the time. You know, give us a little bit of credit for being able to actually, you know, learn the functions of other buttons. You know, you could make it, for example, the mode, you can make it have a little brief pop up when you press the button, so if you forget what they do, you know, let's say for example if this was emissivity, you sort of press that up and down and it would it would pop it up. Range would be another good one, the distance for the measurement. So I think, you know, they could really make quite a big improvement to usability just by, you know, making better use of the buttons. It's a little bit of an annoyance, but yeah, the rest of the functions are, you know, fairly obvious and straightforward. It's just a bit annoying. You have to bounce into these menus to change, and particularly the distance. You know, to actually change that distance setting, which is something you may want to change quite a lot. You've got to go, you know, settings, measurement, alignment distance, click into this, wait for the thing to go into the menu and click up and down. I mean, that's just ridiculous. There's only, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, sort of 6 different settings. You know, why not just be able to go up, down there? It's crazy, it's nuts, stupid. But so apart from that, you know, there's a limit to what this thing has to do, and it does it. It's just it could do it better. Right, let's have a quick look at the Flir tool software that you can download to run with this thing. Most of what this is about is generating reports and so on for things like building inspection. It will allow you to sort of download images. It seems to give a few occasional odd messages about SD cards, and I've also actually seen the camera show an image on its display saying can't save because there's no SD card, but I think it's some timing issue with plugging and unplugging the USB, but it seemed to sort itself out. So these are actually some images that I've previously downloaded. One thing it won't let you do is it won't let you take a picture when the thing's connected. You have to disconnect, but if I just disconnect that, I'll just take around. Yeah, there we go. The image could not be saved, there is no memory card. That's just trying to take a picture as soon as I've unplugged the USB. But if I leave it a little while, do it again, it works. So that's just obviously some temporary little glitch there. Obviously this doesn't have any option for an SD card, so and what we can then do is we can say select an image and generate a report, and then that will show the thermal and the other images and all the measurement information, what the settings were, all this sort of stuff, what the ambient temperature was at the time. And the other thing, probably about the only other useful thing, is it allows you to do software updates, but there's something a bit odd going on here. Look what it says here. Current version 1.18.8, a later version 1.18.7 is available as a free update. And if we then just click on there, this takes us to a generic page that covers all the models. Doesn't take you up to a product specific page. There it goes. Right, then now it's saying Flir EXX series. Now this is an E4, so I'm assuming, is that an EX or an EXX series? I don't really know. But it says 2.23.14, which is totally different. But also in the improvements, it's saying about improvements in video recording and replay, but this doesn't actually have video recording, so I suspect that actually applies to a different model. So as far as I can see, there isn't actually an update for this model available on here, so I don't really know what's going on there. They've obviously screwed something up there, so that's something they need to sort out. Yeah, so you can do this get a live view from the camera. So the thing, it says show hide measurements view, but as far as I can tell, all that seems to do is make the screen smaller. And there's also a plot view, but again, doesn't actually seem to do anything. I wonder if that's just maybe a feature for other camera models, but all this seems to do is really just show images, so this software isn't really all that useful unless you're generating reports. The other thing is you have to enter like name, address, phone number, all sorts of stuff just to download it, which is a bit ridiculous, because you can actually get the files out and get images out without using this. I wouldn't, unless you need to doing reports, I probably wouldn't even bother using this software at all. Right, let's do a quick check on the power consumption. So battery insertion, it's about 500 microamps or so, which would be probably about 4,000 hours of just time before it dies in that mode. It's sort of reasonable with that size battery. Let's turn it on. Wait for it to finish booting up. Right, so normal running mode, we've got about sort of 600-ish milliamps, which corresponds to roughly to that 4-hour battery life figure. Just see how dependent that is on the backlight brightness. So low, it's gone down. We may be reducing because we're not taking images. Go out of. Yes, that's gone down to 500, so that's quite a saving in power draw. I noticed there's a little jump up there, which I think might have been when it was calibrating. The power consumption does seem to bounce up quite a lot, depending on what it's doing, whether that's due to processing or just the LCD or the image, I don't know. But so sort of 500 to 600 milliamps on the backlight. So if you want maximum battery life, it is really worth turning that display brightness down. So you could potentially get close to 5 hours battery life at minimum thing. So let's see what it's like when it goes into standby mode. Looks like it's taking a little while to shut itself down. So we're down to about 3.8 milliamps. So that corresponds to about a month. So in standby mode the battery would be dead in about a month or so, and it's possible that it may actually put itself into a lower power mode after it's been left in this mode for a while. I don't know whether that's the case, but it's sort of not unreal, and I think that the fast startup is probably a bigger advantage than the very slight battery drain. And if you're putting it away for a while, if you get in the habit of just pulling the battery out. But it might be interesting to see if you leave it long enough whether it does actually go down to a lower power mode. Well, that's interesting. I just found if you hold the standby button for quite a long time, it does actually seem to go into a full power down mode. Just looking at the power draw, I haven't checked. I don't know whether it actually documents this in the manual or not. That's probably almost. I believe this thing runs Windows C embedded internally, because there's mention of Microsoft in the copyright notices in the manual, so that's maybe a sort of an integral feature of sort of Windows C, either like a short press does a standby and a long press does a full power down. But I'll just try that again. So if you just sort of keep the button held down until it powers down. Well, actually that's gone into standby. I think you actually have to just keep it pressed for quite a long time after the display's gone, so it's a bit hard to tell which mode it's gone into. But let's start up again. I'll just press that and just keep hold of it. It's annoying there's no visual indication. Now it's gone down to its low standby mode. So it would be nice to have some sort of visual indication that it's gone into that mode, but it's sort of useful to know that it is there. So if you're putting it away for a long time, if you just press the button for a long time, you don't get that 3 milliamp standby power draw. Yeah, I just checked the manual. That long press to go into full power down does actually seem to be an undocumented feature. Speaking of undocumented features, the other thing I noticed is if you power it up from its full power down mode and hold a button down, you actually get some debug messages appearing on screen. I assume these are sort of Windows C startup messages. Unfortunately it does sort of leave them on the screen when it's finished, which is a little bit messy. I'm sure they'll tidy that up in future releases. It leaves it on the screen, but never mind. Right, let's take a look at some actual images. I'm running this through the PC just live rather than trying to actually record the video, because I was having lots of issues with syncing audio and frame rates and so on, so this is just easier. The display might be a little bit less responsive than on the actual unit just because of the USB latencies, but it should give you a fair idea of the actual resolution. So if we look at the raw thermal image, so it's fairly low res, 60 by 80, so for things that are close up, you can get a rough idea of what they are and see how hot they're getting. What their MSX system does, it basically takes a visible image and extracts edges from that and then superimposes those. So this is in this mode. If I just cover up the thermal sensor, you can get a better idea of what it's actually doing. So you can actually see it's just taking those edges and using those just to give some extra visual cues to the low-res thermal image. Now, when you're working close up, it's less of an issue, because if nothing else, you can just stick your hand in the field of view and see what you're pointing at. But if you're looking at something at more of a distance, it can actually be quite difficult to figure out what things are. So if we sort of look further over the workshop, these are obviously the lights. You can see the hot spots where the ballasts are. But if we turn the MSX off, everything becomes quite a lot more blobby, and particularly for small objects. The other issues with thermal images, you quite often get sort of weird things that you can't quite make out from things like reflections. But for example, if we go over here, we see sort of something here which looks like it's hot, but actually, if we look at the real image, it's actually just a piece of reflective shiny metal reflecting heat from somewhere else. And then, for example, here, it's very hard to see, all we've got is just this blob. We don't really have a clue what it is, but if we turn the MSX on, we can now see the details that it's actually the neon in the supply for the air conditioner. You see this is auto ranging as I move it around. So that sudden colour shift is because it's suddenly seen this hot spot from the light, so it's really recalibrated. Now at the moment I've got the distance settings close up, so you see, for example, the heat from this clock is actually looks like it's shifted from where the clock is. If I just readjust the distance setting, we should see that get more accurate. So we take that up to about 2 meters or so. So you can now see that that's now sort of much more accurately lined up with the image. So I mean, this visual sort of enhancement, I think, you know, it's not a gimmick. It does actually provide a very useful function. In, so for example here, this is like, you know, if we turn off the MSX here, yeah, we can see a blob. You know, if you didn't know that was a printer, it might be quite hard to actually tell, but as soon as you turn the MSX, you know, you can really clearly see the outline, you can see what it is, because, yeah, most of the time you're not necessarily really interested in super high resolution of which bit's getting slightly hotter than the other. You're generally looking for hotspots and trying to relate those to a physical object. Like, for example, if you're looking at a house, you might want to see, you know, is the heat coming through the roof or from the edges of the roof or from the side of the chimney and so on, and you don't really need high resolution of the actual thermal data, but you do want to actually relate its position to the real world image. Now obviously this works less well as you get close up, so for example, as I move my hand closer, you can start to see the enhancement shifting from the real image, but you know, I'm now down at about maybe 100 millimeters, so this is back to about sort of 300 millimeters there, so it's not bad. It's, you know, still fairly, yeah, it's certainly good enough to provide useful enhancement. The focus distance of this isn't actually bad. It'll stay sort of moderately focused right up to about sort of 100 millimeters or so. So for example, over here we can sort of see a few sort of vague blobs. Again, if we just set the distance, it's actually starting to be a bit annoying, the fact that you have to go into the settings menu to set this distance up. I mean, I think this really is something they should add, so you can just press the buttons. You know, this is such a useful facility. It's almost sort of partly ruined by having to keep going to the settings menu just to change distances when you're looking at lots of different things. I suppose, I mean, in normal use rather than a demonstration, then maybe you're not going to change it that often, but to not be able to change that with a single button press, I think is really a fairly major oversight in user interface. So over here, you know, we can just see some fairly random blobs. You know, we don't necessarily know what that is, but as soon as we turn the MSX on, we can see, oh, that's a mains adapter, and so that's a little monitor on top of the other Fire Brigade camera. Interestingly, you're actually getting a hot spot there. I think what that's actually seeing through the germanium lens on that other thermal imaging camera and seeing the heat of the detector. It's not a spurious reflection. And over here, this is a reflection. This is just a reflection of the overhead lights on this piece of aluminium. Now obviously something I'm really interested with this is how good it is at looking at things like circuit boards and small components and so on. So we've got a sort of small PCB here. The alignment of the enhancement does actually start going out, which, that's unavoidable. I wouldn't expect that to work well at this distance, but even at this fairly low resolution, okay, it does start getting out of focus. But you know, you can pretty clearly see which bits are getting hot on this board. You know, there's a backlight inverter over here. This is where I think it'll be really nice to have a single button to change between these modes, because if nothing else, if you are needing to swap modes, although it will stay in the menus, you know, you're wasting all this screen, you've got this crap on the screen that you don't want. So to be able to just flip modes with a single button press, I think would be a really sort of really useful enhancement. But so you can pretty much see the alignment is actually surprisingly good. You have to actually get quite close before it gets sort of ridiculously out of alignment, but you know, you can very clearly see which bits are getting hot. So yeah, if you had a board with one part getting a bit hot because it's drawing more current, I really don't think there'd be any difficulty at all in seeing that. I have actually ordered a few cheap zinc selenide laser cutter lenses to have an experiment to see how feasible it would be just to use those as an add-on lens to improve close-ups. Right, so here's an example of a typical sort of fault finding scenario. We've got this board, a load of drivers here, and I've put a deliberate short across one of the decoupling caps so that all we know is there's a short somewhere on the supply rail to these chips. Put it in thermal mode. I'll just turn the power on. We're putting there's quite a fat track, so I'm putting about 4 amps through it, but immediately you can see that track lit up. Bang, there we go. That's where our short is. Obviously there is an offset, but one thing, because of the position of the camera, you know it's always going to be a vertical offset. So yeah, if we know that the fault is somewhere along this horizontal line, although the image is offset, we know the offset is only vertical, so our horizontal position is actually pretty accurate. So the capacitor's actually just sort of down there. So although it's not overlaying very accurately on the thermal image, our horizontal position is actually accurate enough to be able to get right down to locate where the fault is. Right, so to sum up this thing, excellent build quality, useful tool. The video overlay thing is a genuinely useful feature. It's not a gimmick, it really is useful. Yeah, pretty much the only complaints I've got is it needs a nice small soft padded case, not this big briefcase thing. This just doesn't really make any sense. A tiny little bit of work on the firmware to basically make these buttons more useful. I mean, I've only been using it for a couple of hours, and the thing that's really screamed is it's really annoying having to go into the menu to change the display mode and to set the distance. I think all they need to do is use these 5 otherwise wasted buttons in normal mode to give you cycle through the display modes, set distance, and maybe some other function. I mean, okay, in an ideal world, you know, different people have different use applications. Maybe the perfect solution would actually be able to let the user configure what these buttons do. But you know, if they want to keep it simple, you know, those really basic functions you want to get to all the time, to not have to go through a menu, I think would be a really useful enhancement. You know, I like the fact you can just plug it in, it will pretend to be a camera, so you can run it on your PC, you can shoot video, you can shoot time-lapse. I might have a play around doing a bit of that at some point. You know, pricing is pretty reasonable. Yeah, as thermal imaging cameras go, it's pretty cheap, but they haven't skimped on the build quality. That's what I like. Yeah, it's a, you know, it's a cheap end camera, but it's, you know, it still looks and feels like a really nice, decent piece of kit. The 9 frames a second frame rate, I really don't see that as a limitation at all. I've not really found that at all annoying. You know, for just fault finding stuff, it just isn't an issue. You know, the fact that the resolution is only 80 by 60, the video overlaying thing really takes a lot of that away. I really can't see why you would want to spend, you know, over 4 times as much money for 4 times the resolution. I just don't think the benefit would be that great compared to what you've got with this basic camera. And to be honest, you know, I can really see them selling a lot more of these than the high-end ones. Pure, you know, unless they can really cut the price of the high-end ones down by probably a factor of 2. This has to, you know, be by far the best value of money. So yeah, thumbs up. I'd say 8 out of 10, maybe 9 out of 10 if they sort this firmware issue out. So I like, for example, they put some thought into things like start-up time, the fact that the thermal image starts while the rest of the thing's getting itself going. So they obviously put some thought into that. People don't want to wait for these things to start up. The start-up time from standby is good. Battery life seems to be fine. I'll do some measurements at some point, but yeah, 4 hours claimed. I don't know whether that's at full or minimum backlight level, but yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable amount of working time for a piece of kit like that. So yeah, all in all, maybe hardware wise, I'm just a little bit nervous about how robust this micro USB is going to be. But to be honest, in terms of hardware, that's pretty much it. As I say, I will do some experiments with some additional lenses for real close-up work. So I've got those on order at the moment. I've heard from someone on the EV blog forum said that they've had quite good success with like some really cheap laser cutter lenses. So for electronics work, close-up work, that would be quite a useful enhancement. But other than that, yes, great piece of kit. Really like it. Very impressed.